And now, ladies and gentlemen, rolling right along with our bombastic review, we have a great show for you tonight.
Paul Lynde was born on June 13, 1926, in Mount Vernon, Ohio. His childhood was shaped by both small-town charm and deep family heartbreak. His parents, Hoy and Sylvia, worked hard to provide for their 6 children. They ran a meat market, and for some time the family lived above the county jail since Hoy also worked as sheriff. Paul grew up surrounded by gossip and daily drama in a town where everyone knew each other's business. This environment helped him develop the sharp, watchful humor that later became his trademark. He loved performing from a young age, singing in the church choir and appearing in school concerts. But tragedy struck when his older brother, Cordy, died during World War II in the Battle of the Bulge at just 21 years old. The grief was unbearable for the family, and both of Paul's parents died only a few years later, broken by the loss. Paul was only 23 when he found himself without parents, without his brother, and carrying a deep sadness that would stay with him forever. He learned early that laughter could cover pain, and comedy became his shield. His biting one-liners and sharp jokes weren't just for entertainment, they were his way of surviving a world that had already hurt him so deeply. Paul's love for performance started when he was just a child. His mother once took him to see the silent movie Ben-Hur, and the spectacle of the chariot races and dramatic sets lit a spark inside him. Movies became his escape from reality, and he spent hours watching Laurel and Hardy or Buster Keaton, learning how humor could bring joy even in difficult times. By high school, Paul was the class clown. He played the bass drum in the school band, sang in the choir, and entertained classmates with jokes. Humor wasn't only his way of making friends, it was also how he deflected, teasing about his weight and mannerisms. In 1944, after graduating high school, he enrolled at Northwestern University to study speech and drama. There, he was surrounded by talented students who would also become stars, like Charlton Heston and Cloris Leachman. Paul stood out for his outrageous humor, his quick wit, and his ability to make any story hilarious. He joined the fraternity scene, acted in plays, and sharpened his style. By the time he graduated in 1948, Paul was determined to turn his passion into a career. At just 22, he packed his bags and moved to New York City. Life there wasn't easy. He worked as a busboy, waiter, and soda jerk while performing late-night stand-up. The crowds were tough, the pay was small, but those early years built his resilience. His big break came in 1952 when he performed in New Faces of 1952, a Broadway revue that showcased young talent. His hilarious safari monologue, performed on crutches, became a sensation. Critics praised him, and audiences remembered him. For Paul, this was proof that his dream of making people laugh could become real, even though his performance in New Faces of 1952 gained him attention. Paul spent the next several years struggling to find steady work. He took small roles on radio, appeared on variety shows, and did voice work to survive. By 1960, his persistence paid off when he landed the role of Harry McAfee, the uptight suburban father, in Bye Bye Birdie on Broadway. The musical poked fun at the teenage craze over Elvis Presley's draft, and Paul's character stole the show. His delivery of the line, "Ed Sullivan, I love Ed Sullivan," became a cultural catchphrase. Critics praised his comic timing, and suddenly, Paul was seen as one of Broadway's brightest comedy stars. Unlike many stage actors who were replaced by bigger names in film adaptations, Paul kept his role when the show was made into a movie in 1963, acting alongside Dick Van Dyke, Janet Leigh, and Anne Margaret. Paul's performance was again a highlight. The movie's success made him recognizable nationwide, and it proved that his unique brand of comedy worked just as well on the big screen. Around the same time, he recorded a comedy album called Recently Released, which sold well and showed how he could mix theater with sharp humor in a new format. By the mid-1960s, Paul was appearing on popular variety shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and The Dean Martin Show. He also started landing film roles, including a part in Disney's Son of Flubber and a role in Under the Yum Yum Tree with Jack Lemmon. It seemed like Paul's career was finally soaring. Yet, even as the spotlight grew brighter, shadows from his personal life began to creep closer, setting the stage for the struggles that would define his later years. In July 1965, Paul experienced a night that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He, and a young actor named James Bing Davidson, just 24 years old, checked into the Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco. The two had been drinking heavily that night. Around 2:30 a.m., they returned to their 8th-floor room, loud and intoxicated. What happened next was a nightmare. Bing, known for his wild side, playfully said, "Watch me do a trick," and attempted to climb out the hotel window. At first, Paul thought he was joking, but then Bing panicked, crying out that he was slipping. In a horrifying moment, Paul rushed to grab him, holding onto his wrist and trying desperately to pull him back inside. But Bing was too heavy and too drunk, his body swinging dangerously over the street below. Despite Paul's frantic efforts, Bing's grip gave way. He fell 8 stories to the pavement, dying almost instantly. Witnesses and police confirmed it as a tragic accident, but Paul never forgave himself. The memory of holding his friend's hand and failing to save him became a scar he carried for life. Newspapers covered the story briefly, but Hollywood quickly moved on. Paul, however, did not. He drowned his guilt in alcohol, and his drinking began to spiral. From that night onward, friends noticed that his humor grew sharper, almost biting, as if he was laughing through pain. While his career continued to rise with roles in Bewitched and variety shows, inside Paul was sinking. He began to rely on alcohol to numb his feelings, and his private struggles started leaking into his public life. What the world saw was a quick-witted comedian who could make anyone laugh. What Paul felt was guilt and loneliness that no amount of fame could erase. Despite his personal struggles, Paul Lynde's career reached new heights in the mid-1960s when he was cast as Uncle Arthur in the hit sitcom Bewitched. Although he only appeared in 11 episodes between 1965 and 1971, audiences adored him so much that many believed he was a regular character. His mischievous grin, campy humor, and sharp one-liners made Uncle Arthur unforgettable. Producers even created the role especially for him after he first appeared on the show in a smaller part. At the same time, Paul was becoming a familiar face in films, starring in light comedies like Beach Blanket, Bingo, and The Glass Bottom Boat with Doris Day. But his greatest television fame came in 1967, when he joined the game show Hollywood Squares. By 1968, he was the permanent center square, the most coveted spot on the board. Over the next 15 years, Paul appeared in more than 1,000 episodes, delivering legendary one-liners that often had sly double meanings. In an era when television avoided certain topics, Paul's humor was daring yet subtle, making audiences laugh without crossing lines that would have gotten him banned. Fans adored him, and he became one of the most recognizable television personalities of the time. Comedians like Mel Brooks even said Paul could make a phone book sound funny. His wit was unmatched, and his place in comedy seemed secure. Yet, as his career soared on screen, his personal demons continued to grow stronger. The guilt from Bing's death, the pressure of hiding his private life, and his increasing reliance on alcohol all worked against him, slowly pulling him into a darker spiral. Behind the laughter, Paul Lynde's life was unraveling. By the 1970s, his drinking had become uncontrollable. He was often arrested for public drunkenness and gained a reputation for being cruel when intoxicated. Friends described how his biting humor would turn into outright meanness during drunken outbursts. Once, he even put out a cigarette on his manager's hand in a restaurant. These moments shocked those who knew him, and many began to distance themselves from him. He also struggled with drug use, relying on pills and cocaine alongside alcohol. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable, leading to lost opportunities. In 1972, Paul finally got his dream of having his own sitcom, The Paul Lynde Show. But the show failed to gain viewers and was cancelled after just 26 episodes. The cancellation crushed Paul's confidence and sent him deeper into addiction. By the late 1970s, his reputation in Hollywood was badly damaged. He embarrassed himself during public appearances, including a racist outburst at his old university and a drunken incident. on a flight where he lost his clothes and staggered off wrapped in a blanket. Stories of his erratic behavior spread quickly, overshadowing his talent. Even though he tried to stop drinking in 1980 and briefly achieved sobriety, years of damage to his health and career could not be undone. His once bright star had faded, and the gap between the beloved comedian on television and the lonely man off stage grew wider. Hollywood adored the character Paul played, but the real Paul was falling apart. In his final years, Paul Lynde tried to find peace. He managed to get sober in 1988, but the years of alcohol and drug abuse had already taken a serious toll on his body. He was overweight, and his heart and lungs were severely damaged. Doctors later found hardened arteries and emphysema, conditions made worse by his past lifestyle. Though he gave up on the dream of becoming a serious actor, Paul still recognized the value of laughter. He once said, "If I can make people laugh, I'm making a more important contribution." It was a bittersweet acceptance that comedy was his greatest gift, even if it came from a place of pain. On January 10, 1982, friends became worried when Paul didn't show up for a dinner party. The next day, they broke into his home and found him dead in his bed, wearing his pajamas and robe. His loyal dog barked nearby, and the alarm was still set, showing he had been alone. Paul had died of a massive heart attack at the age of just 55. Rumors spread about the circumstances of his death, but the truth was simple. His years of excess had finally caught up with him. His death shocked fans who had loved him for his quick wit and unforgettable performances. While Hollywood moved on, those who remembered Paul knew that behind the humor was a man who had carried too much sorrow. His life was proof that even the funniest people can be hiding the deepest pain. Paul Lynde's life was a mix of brilliance and heartbreak. He became one of the most recognizable comedic voices of his time, with performances on Hollywood Squares, Bewitched, and Bye Bye Birdie leaving a lasting impression on American pop culture. His one-liners are still quoted today, proof that his humor was timeless. Yet, his story also serves as a reminder of the struggles comedians often face behind closed doors. For Paul, laughter was both a weapon and a shield, a way to keep the world at a distance while masking his own loneliness. The tragedy at the San Francisco hotel haunted him forever, fueling addictions that nearly destroyed his career. His failed sitcom and his public scandals showed how fragile fame can be, and how quickly Hollywood turns away when a star begins to fall. Still, Paul's sharp wit and unique style carved him a place in comedy history. He made audiences laugh when he himself was hurting, and in that way, he gave something valuable to the world. Today, fans remember not just the broken man, but the performer who could make even the simplest line sound hilarious. Behind every one-liner was indeed a broken man, but also an artist who turned pain into laughter. Paul Lynde's hidden truth may be sad, but his legacy continues to bring joy to those who hear his jokes. His life reminds us to look deeper, to understand that even the brightest smiles can hide sorrow. In remembering Paul, we celebrate both the laughter he gave and the struggles he endured, honoring a man whose comedy mattered because it came from the most human of places: pain, survival, and the desire to make others happy.